Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and it's always fun to hear my colleague Tom share his wisdom from his years of experience in the legislature and as our state treasurer. He's a great asset to North Dakota, so thank you, Tom, for all your service. So my name is Julie Fedorchak. I'm a commissioner on the North Dakota Public Service Commission. I am this year celebrating with my colleague Brandon Chrisman my 10th year on the commission. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to be involved in a lot of interesting things in North Dakota, and we'll talk about some of those right now. Coming in this morning was sure gorgeous. It was a sharp contrast to the last time I came here for your conference, which was like 2 months ago. I pulled up and the parking lot was empty, and I thought, what's going on here? The conference had clearly been postponed, and I hadn't read my emails, so I had been told it wasn't your guys' fault. But anyway, much nicer day this morning with the birds chirping and everything else. So I want to go through this morning the permitting process for energy infrastructure that the Public Service Commission follows, and be available to answer any questions that you have. So before I get started, I want to thank all of you for the wonderful service that you provide to your citizens in your communities and your counties and your townships. I know you get to deal with a lot of really fun and easy issues and a lot of really complicated and tough issues too, and living side by side with people whose your decisions affect. So that's not easy. But at least you're comforted by getting paid a whole bunch of money to do it. So there's always that to make life better. No, I have a sense for what you go through, because we go through some of the same thing on the Public Service Commission from the permitting processes that we follow. So I'm going to walk through that and share with you some of the structure that we follow. So first of all, the North Dakota legislature has provided, it's going back to the 1970s, a process that we call siting. It is basically the permitting process for any of the energy, broad category energy infrastructure in North Dakota. This is the section of law that covers that. It's Chapter 4922. And it basically ensures that the location, construction, and operation of the site that's chosen has minimal impact on the public and the people living around it. And then also ensures that it provides a process by which we can develop the energy resources that we have in North Dakota in an orderly way, and ensure that these resources are developed without having too big of an impact on people or our environment. So those are the kind of the big, broad principles that guide the permitting process. Here's what needs a permit from the Public Service Commission. If you're generating 50,000 kilowatts of electricity or more from a generation facility, so that would be a wind farm, a natural gas power plant, coal, anything, 50,000 kilowatts or higher needs a permit from us. That's pretty small standard. And that was decreased just to capture most of the wind farms, so people couldn't come in and put in, a 25 megawatt wind farm or something like that without a permit. So that's why that threshold is pretty low. The refinement of 1,000 million cubic feet per day of gas, so that's the gas processing facilities, and the refinement of 50,000 barrels per day of liquid hydrocarbons, so that would be like a Tesoro type of facility, 50,000 barrels per day or more, a 115 kilovolt or higher than 115 kilovolt electric transmission pipeline or line, and then gas or liquid transmission pipelines, including CO2. And so I'll go through. There is some difference between the interstate and in-state lines and who has a jurisdiction for citing those. So we'll go through those in a minute. And then water lines to and from a energy conversion facility. So if a natural gas power generation facility needed water for its purpose, we would cite that water line, but otherwise we have nothing to do with water pipelines at all. All right, so that covers what needs a permit. So just in general, the siting process really looks at and breaks down into two buckets. So the legislature thought, what do we need to think about when we're permitting and providing the companies an opportunity to build this infrastructure? How do we go about this? So they broke it down into two big buckets, basically, and looked at, so Public Service Commission, when you're going to grant a permit to a private entity to build something, you need to look at two things: exclusion areas and avoidance areas. Those are the two big buckets of things we look at. So we're here, they want to build it in this big, like, so a wind farm, 24,000 acre site. What do we need to look at? There's two big buckets: exclusion areas and avoidance areas. Obviously, exclusion areas are things that are more serious and they have to be excluded. There's no opportunity for constructing in an exclusion area. And then the second bucket is avoidance areas. So I'll go through those in a second here. But so the exclusion areas are, as you can see here, county, state, or national parks, historical sites or monuments, landmarks, refuges, grasslands, game management areas, and natural preserves. So those can be in the permit areas, say like a wind farm can have them within it, but the infrastructure can't impact those things. And then the second is habitat for threatened or endangered animals or plants. Again, those areas exist within or near these facilities, but those areas have to be excluded from the impact. So if there's like what's the name of that butterfly that's endangered right now? No, not the monarch. Oh, anyway, it's a very specific butterfly. And it only has, limited territory, but we frequently butt up against it, and the companies just have to like fence it off and, construct during certain times and that sort of thing. So that's how they deal with these. Habitats for animals or plant species that are unique or rare to this state. That's something that the Game and Fish oversees. And then areas within 1,200 feet of an ICBM launch or control facility. And that we deal with the Minot Air Force Base largely in working through those issues. So those are the exclusion areas. Additionally, just for wind, there's a few more exclusion areas, and those are, so 1.1, so a little bit higher than the height of the turbine from interstates or state roads right away, railroad right away, any electric transmission line right of way, or the property line of a non-participating landowner. So that's the property line of the non-participating landowner. The turbines have to be 1.1 times the turbine height away from that, unless the landowner signs off on it. Then there's also, you need to be 1.1 times the turbine height plus 75 feet from the center line of county or township roads, and then 3 times the turbine height from an inhabited rural residence of a non-participating landowner. So that this is for wind. These are extra wind exclusion areas. So if you're a non-participating landowner in a near wind project and you have a home kind of near where they're developing, those turbines have to be 3 times the height of the turbine away from your property, the home, not the property line, the inhabited residence. Or you can waive that as well, but most people in those situations don't. So those are the additional exclusion areas just for wind. Now I will note that every county and townships, I would assume, fall in the same bucket, can consider these same issues and for wind turbines and some other of these facilities and develop your own exclusion areas and setbacks, etc. And then we defer to you if they're stricter. So the company has to abide by whichever of the laws and rules are tightest. There is one exception to that, and that's crude oil pipelines. The legislature passed a law that we can supersede you on crude oil pipelines. You can't have stricter requirements for those. All right, so that's some of the exclusion areas. The next bucket is avoidance areas, and these are things that the companies need to avoid, but they can impact them if they can prove to us that there's no reasonable alternative, and that's a judgment call on us. If they bring their case to us during the hearing and say, here's why we can't avoid impacting this. And this is the list of those things, and I'm not going to go through it all, but some of the bigger ones that we see a lot are the geologically unstable areas. There's a lot of those in western North Dakota. Pipelines go through those areas pretty regularly, so they have to mitigate those issues. And then the sound issue too kind of comes up a lot. 50 decibels within 100 feet of an inhabited residence or community building. That's for largely for wind, but other things too. It could be, it could be pumping stations for a pipeline, that sort of thing. So if the sound has to be proven to be that level or lower within 100 feet of the residence. Right, that's the highlights there. So here's the process that we follow through the siting process. So first the company applies. Okay, so the companies come up with their projects. They work a lot with landowners. They work a lot with game and fish. They work a lot with counties, etc., coming up with where they want to put things. Once they get their plans somewhat in order and have an application ready and have all the studies that we require and have all the maps and all the requirements, and it's a substantial application. I mean, if you've ever been to our hearings, you've seen them. They're many binders, usually full of studies, etc., that they have to complete before they can apply to us. They send us the application. The second process, our staff reviews that application, make sure that we have everything that we need, that they've completed all the components that are required by law for us to review. Once they review that and deem the application complete, then we set the hearing date for the whatever project is being considered. And then that hearing date is noticed in all the counties that have infrastructure located in that county. We have to, required by law, put a notice in the county newspaper of every county where there's infrastructure. And then we typically have hearings located throughout the distance. If it's a pipeline, where a person might only have to travel about an hour to get to the hearing. We are required to, the legislature would like us to have hearings in every single county where there's infrastructure, but it gets a little unwieldy and it takes a lot of time. So we have the ability to consolidate. And so we do, like on the Dakota Access Pipeline, that was a 300-mile line through North Dakota. We had 3 hearings. So anybody who wanted to attend probably had to drive a maximum of an hour to come to one of the hearings. And there, I know I'm not part of the next, the CO2 pipeline review, but our commissioners who are in the process of developing that hearing schedule for that project, and that I think they plan to have 4 hearings for that. So those should be pretty easy to access. Then we have the public hearing, and that's that is when the public has an opportunity to come testify and get your information on the record on which we will be basing a decision. If you were to talk to somebody or talk to a commissioner, which you shouldn't do, and it's not even allowed, but say even talk to staff or send us an email outside of that public hearing, it is not part of the public record, and that information cannot be used by us to make a decision. So it's really important to get your information, if you have it, on the public record on which our decision is based. That happens at the public hearing. And it's very easy to participate in our public hearings. You don't have to have written, printed out testimony. We like it, but you don't have to. You can show up. You don't have to tell us ahead of time that you're going to. You can sit through the whole hearing and at the very end decide, hey, I have something to say. Come up to the microphone, tell us your name, swear that you're telling the truth, and speak. So it's very simple. And the whole reason we go to the locations to have the hearings is so that we can hear from the public and make it easy for you all to tell us what you think. So that's the whole reason we do it. Otherwise, we could have the hearings in the Capitol building, which we never do. So that's the public hearing. After that, once the hearing and the record is closed, then we you see the red line, that means no more public input. No more input from the companies or anything else unless they're just responding or clarifying information that's already on the record. Then the commission goes into work sessions. These are all open to the public. They're broadcast on the internet. You can listen, you can't participate. No parties, the company, any interveners, nobody can participate in those hearings, but you can listen to everything that goes on because commissioners can't talk to each other ever about a case in private. Anytime there's two of us, it's a quorum and it's public meeting. So all of our deliberations about any project or any issue before the commission are done in public meetings. We call them work sessions, and we do broadcast those on the internet for anybody to hear. And you're also welcome to come up to the commission and participate in those or listen to those there. We have anywhere from 1 to, I think with Dakota Access, we probably had 8 to 10 work sessions after the hearing, where we just go through all our questions, go through public input, walk through each piece of it, try to figure out how we might address it. We work with our staff on those things and our attorneys. And then when we feel like we've gotten everything we need and have all the issues resolved, then we make a decision and issue that. It's called a findings of fact, conclusions of law and order. And that's where we either approve or deny the application for the project. I will tell you, we get asked a lot, do you ever deny them? We have occasionally denied permits, but the reason why most of them are approved is not because it's a rubber stamp. I would hope that if any of you have participated in our hearings, you realize it is not a rubber stamp. We go through things in great detail and we're pretty hard to make sure that there are no things left unturned or no issues left unaddressed. We can't fix everything. We can't make everybody happy. You guys know that. You have to make a decision sometimes, and that means some people are going to win, some people are going to lose. But we do our very best to address as many issues as we can. And when that order is approved, typically it's because the company has changed their project enough to meet the requirements of the law. That's their goal. These are multi-million-dollar projects. By the time they even come to us, they've already invested many times tens of millions of dollars in the project already before they even come to get a permit. And so their goal is to get that permit, and they're going to do what they need to do to change the project in order to get it. So that's why you don't see a lot of projects not approved by the Public Service Commissions, because the company works to address the issues and get their project in compliance with the law. So let's see here. Then after the permit is, say we approved it, there's a pre-construction meeting with our staff and the company and their construction contractors. And we go through all the requirements of the permit. So everybody's on the same page, know what the expectations are. And then on the very first day of construction, they have to have our inspectors on site, and they approve their first excavation to make sure they know what they're doing when it comes to segregating the topsoil from the subsoil. It's one of the main keys to good reclamation, getting the ground to be productive after the fact. And so our inspectors are on site. They're third-party inspectors. They're not paid by the company. They're paid by us, making sure that they know what they're doing, and they approve them then to go ahead. And we have those third-party construction inspectors out there multiple times during the construction process. And again, after the process, they file reports with us and identify any problems, and then we work with the company to address those problems until all the issues for reclamation are completed. And then you see that's the post-construction inspection at the end that I just talked about. All right, this is a miserable chart. I'm sorry. It's got really good information and stuff that you might be interested in. What is this the? Okay. All right. I'm just going to quickly so this really is meant to show a couple things. First of all, this is all the jurisdiction that exists for pipeline regulation. And it breaks it into two buckets, the interstate and the intrastate. Those are the blue lines. This is intrastate. So in-state pipelines and then interstate pipelines that go through North Dakota into other states. And then it breaks it down into different categories: gathering lines, transmission lines. That's a definition in law. What is the difference between a gathering and a transmission line? And then a distribution line. Those are all three different types. And then interstate gathering and transmission. So as you can see, the gathering line, they are less regulated. Gathering lines are largely, in North Dakota, are largely regulated by the Industrial Commission, especially because they largely deal with natural gas and crude oil lines. And then the Department of Environmental Quality and the Industrial Commission oversee construction. The operation and safety of all of these pretty much is PHMSA. PHMSA stands for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. PHMSA, it's a federal agency. They manage all of the operation and safety of the main lines that you would be concerned about. And then, let's see here, that's incident response. So if there's a problem, who responds to those? And largely in North Dakota, it's the Department of Environmental Quality, and federally, it's the EPA. And they work together with PHMSA and address issues if there is a problem. And that's the case with both CO2, crude oil, and natural gas lines. So the Public Service Commission, we provide the construction permit for CO2 transmission lines, crude oil transmission lines, and natural gas transmission lines, all in state. And then the same for, we provide the same for interstate CO2 lines and crude oil lines, but interstate natural gas lines, so those big, huge natural gas lines that go multiple states, the permit, the operation permit, the construction operation permit is provided by FERC. So we're not involved in that siting. So that kind of gives you an overview of who's responsible for what. It's a little complicated, but there's a lot to be done in all of these aspects. So it's really important to have experts at each level following this. That's why you see PHMSA is responsible for the safety oversight of largely all of the lines. And they set the standards nationally, and they have the staff throughout the country that does the monitoring long-term of all these pipelines. All right, so that covers the jurisdictional issues. And I just want to talk a little bit before I get it open for questions on decommissioning. This is my colleague, Randy Chrisman, has worked really hard on making sure that there's really good high decommissioning standards for the wind facilities that are constructed in North Dakota. And when he went about developing the proposal for this, which has been approved and baked into our law, he looked at what's required for coal mining reclamation. He was a legislator in District 3, which is the heart of the coal country, and was very familiar with the coal mining reclamation standards. And so our wind farm reclamation standards, I think, are probably the best in the country, and they mirror what is expected of coal mining and reclamation. So this is what decommissioning includes. Removal of all the towers, turbines, generators, transformers, and overhead cables, all the underground cables to a depth of 24 inches, removal of the foundations, the bases for the turbines, buildings, and ancillary equipment to a depth of 3 feet prior to 2017, anything constructed prior to 2017, 3-foot depth, and then we tightened it a little bit after 2017, and all of those foundations have to be removed to 4 feet for anything constructed after 2017. Site restoration, and then grading, topsoil, respread, and reseeding. That's what decommissioning is required for all wind farms permitted by the Public Service Commission, which is all wind farms in the state. All right, the cost estimates. So in addition to having to meet those standards, they also have to have financial assurances. Those are based on cost estimates of what the decommissioning is going to cost. And the cost estimates must be performed by a professional engineer licensed by the state of North Dakota and at the owner's expense. The cost estimate must exclude the salvage value of all the stuff that's taken down. And then it must be updated. They have to have that on file before they operate, and then they have to update it within 9 years, or we can require them to update it at any time. And so that's to ensure that they have looked at how much it's going to cost to take these down. And from day one of operations, they've provided some financial assurances, which I'll show you in a second, to ensure that they have the resources to remove this infrastructure when it's no longer in use. So the financial insurances, so prior to construction, prior to any turning over of dirt, they must provide financial assurances up to 5% of the estimated facility cost with the commission. And then prior to operation, so before they can start operating, they have to have sufficient financial assurances to cover all the costs of decommissioning based on the cost estimates we just walked through. And then this is the type of the assurances that are allowed. They can have a performance bond, surety bond, irrevocable letter of credit, self-guarantee. So the reason why we allow self-guarantees or parent guarantee would be more for the investor-owned utility owners of these facilities, because we already regulate them. We are very familiar with their financial pictures and can really judge whether a self-guarantee or parent guarantee would be worthwhile, and then anything else deemed by the commission. They've suggested, some of these facilities have come to us with other ideas. We haven't really been keen on them yet, and so we've been pretty strict in what sort of financial assurances we'll accept. So that covers financial insurances. Just a little information here about when, where, how to address your concerns. So talk a little bit about this. So pre-permitting and construction. So early on, when companies come into your area, that's the time for you to deal with them directly, either as a landowner, leasee, or even just a township official. You should be negotiating directly with them. In the middle, again, local, county, and local zoning and permitting. And then when it gets to the PSC level, that's considered late in the game, because they've been working for years already trying to get these projects moving. So you're still very welcome, and we encourage you to engage with us then, but just know that by this point, there's a decent amount of steam behind a project and a lot of money invested. And so it's a little later in the process, and it's easier to get changes earlier in the process. But still, at the evidentiary hearing, we have a lot of opportunity for engagement with the public, and you can provide testimony in the record on which we base our decision. Then if there's problems after construction, landowners can negotiate whatever they want in their contract from the beginning. Also something important to remind landowners. My sense is landowners are very astute nowadays in North Dakota because of all the energy permitting, but 10 years ago, that was not the case. But negotiate whatever you like in your contract with them. And then if you have complaints after something is constructed, you can complain to us, because as we hold the permit, they're responsible to us long-term for the life of that permit, and we can deal with them directly. And then there's the ombudsman program through the North Dakota Department of Agriculture that works really well with landowners and companies to address reclamation problems as well. And that's it. So hopefully that covers some of what you might have been interested in hearing, but whatever else you might want me to talk about, I'd be happy to answer any additional questions. I have a gentleman in the back, and I think, got 1, 2, 3. Okay, we'll go around here.
Is there any interest in solar farms in North Dakota?
There are. We have actually permitted one solar farm of 300 megawatts right outside of Castleton. And there was a hearing on that, I'm guessing maybe 4 years ago. I don't believe that project has ever been developed. I think they're looking for a buyer still for that project, but we don't have the greatest solar resource in the country, as we all learned in the last few weeks and months. It hasn't. I bought solar lights for my Christmas tree outside. They never turned on. Didn't get charged up fully once. So anyway, solar isn't renewable. Developers really want our wind resource. That's what's really great for them. But a little bit of solar interest in that may change as technology changes. Anybody? Oh, I think there was somebody over here, and then there was someone right here, and then I see it over here.
Does it require depth for putting in a pipeline? Or conflicting reports from some?
Yes, there is a required depth, and I want to say 38 inches. I'm sorry, repeat it. What was the required depth for pipelines? And I believe it's 38 inches, or 42. And it's something that we always talk about in our hearing.
Bottom of the pipeline? 32 inches, 42 inches above.
Above. Yep. I'm going to text our staff real quick. See how responsive they are. Okay. I'll get back to you if they do. All right. Somebody over here? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Right in front.
I have two questions. When the ownership of these companies that develop them change, how do the townships get hold of people?
That is a very excellent question.
Give us contact, then we call and nobody's responsible.
Relevant. Yeah. Yep.
So
Everybody heard that question, I think, because she had the mic. So this was a big problem even for the commission earlier on in my time on the commission, with all the massive amount of pipeline development that was taking place out west. And we required in our permit that they keep us constantly notified. It's actually one of the requirements they sign off on of their changing ownership. But so you could institute something like that in any sort of a county or local zoning requirement. And then furthermore, when companies change, there is a process at the commission when they actually want to change ownership. They have to come and change pass the title of the permit from one to the other. And there's a public notice process for that. And then they have to certify that they're gonna, abide by all the same conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a public process for that occurs at the commission. And so, there would be a way to track that ownership through our permits as well. So you could always come to us and we could help you.
the other, these companies have to have like a maximum liability if someone gets hurt from their products. Say the wind tower blows apart and, smashes somebody's car driving by or combine or whatever. Are they required to have a certain amount of liability insurance?
So the insurance issues are not something that is required for our permits. We don't have a standard for insurance, but I would assume that there either is a standard or the companies themselves have a best practice that they are, adequately or generously insured for injuries and that type of thing.
So who's the enforcement? Something, well, let's say that on a pipeline and they get it graded properly or live up to the terms of their agreement. Who do you get a hold of? Who do we enforce?
That's us. Well, in terms of throughout the construction process and reclamation, and even long-term on the pipeline, if they are in violation of the standards established in our permit, we're the enforcement, and we can and have fined them for being out of compliance. So we would get notice that they're out of compliance. Our staff would either work with them informally to say, you need to get into compliance, and depending on how big of an issue it is, then once they're back into compliance, then our staff can again go back and say, we think that your violation deserves a fine, and they might negotiate a fine and bring that negotiation to us, and we can either approve it or say, no, it's not enough. Or they can bring a case to us and we can have a full-on hearing on that case, and the company and the staff can bring their issues to us, and we would ultimately decide. Either way, the commission ultimately decides what the fine would be.
We can get a hold of you then, your
Yep. If you think they're out of compliance, get a hold of us.
another question, might not be relevant, but how come when the Dakota Access pipeline didn't go around the sewer or the reservation rather than going through it with their pipeline? Was there no other option?
So to understand, the pipeline did go around the reservation. It did not go through it. It's not on the reservation.
But it went under the Missouri River?
It went under the Missouri River, north of the reservation land, but it did not go across. It was a mile or two away from the border of the reservation. So that was a pretty significant misunderstanding during all of that. It's a lot of people assumed that it went through the reservation, and it did not.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Sure, right here. And then I'm gonna have somebody else help me pick who gets to talk next, because I might be missing folks. Dakota Skipper, yes, now.
Richard, there was red flag. Do you guys as the commission, do you have the power to shut down like a pipeline if there's a major failure?
So in terms of the safety and operation of the pipeline, that is overseen by PHMSA. They monitor the lines throughout the life of the line and make sure that they're complying with all the federal safety standards. And so PHMSA would be the lead on shutting it down for a safety issue. If there was some other issue that we felt warranted them, like if they were not complying by the terms of our permit, yes, we can shut them down because we hold the permit. They have to be in compliance with us.
One follow-up.
Or a wind farm or natural gas generation facility, any of those that are permitted.
Would Eastern Pipe and need scooped down in South Dakota?
Mm-hmm.
Who's responsible for it? Who cleans it up, pays for it?
Very good question. So anytime there's an accident caused by any of this infrastructure, the company bears the responsibility for cleaning it up, making people whole, fixing the pipe, returning it back to standards, showing that they are back to standards, and anything related to that accident is 100% on the shoulders of the company. Is there enough teeth in the law to make sure that things are cleaned up? Yes, I believe there are, and it's extremely expensive for these companies. And we had a significant spill out west in the Tioga area, and that company, I can't remember who it was. There's probably somebody here who knows that very well. Has spent many years cleaning that up and getting things right. And sometimes you can't fix things 100%, but there's also a legal process where landowners can sue the company and take their case to court and get damages, etc. All right, let's see. I'm going to look over here because I saw some hands up earlier. Way in the back. And then you tell me when my time's up. I know, I started after mine was supposed to be done.
Just comment on windmills. If you have windmills on your land, you want to make sure it's noted in your farm liability plan, because you can be held liable for some of the damages.
Mhm.
If somebody hits that on your land, drives into one of them, you can be held liable for that.
Interesting.
But it doesn't cost you hardly anything more to have that liability on there. But you want that liability policy on there, because we have this, so we know. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Right here, right in front of that, Jen.
In our township, we have a pump station and a pipeline. It used to be Dole, and then it was bought out by Kinder Morgan, and it recently was sold to Pembina. And that line is getting 40, 5 to 50 years old. What's the life cycle of that? And what happens after you shut it down or something for age?
Sure. So the life cycle typically is around 50 years, but, you know, companies will say with really good maintenance and monitoring, they can last longer than that. It just depends on sort of the type of the soil and the conditions under which it's operated and how well it's been maintained. And so when a pipeline is deemed to be, you know, outside of its useful life and shut down, typically there's a whole process for getting everything out of it, cleaning it out, and basically capping it, and then it's left in the ground generally. Just because you'd have to go through a lot of, you know, environmental damage just to pull it out, so that it's considered to be less and more environmentally sound to leave it in the ground. Mr. Weber?
You have the land first rights, will you ever, allow eminent domain to be used to pipeline through?
The eminent domain question. Would have been so disappointed if nobody asked that. All right, just to be painfully clear again, I am not a decision maker on the Carbon Summit pipeline case. So my husband and I are not easement holders of the pipeline. We have signed a contract to store. We have some land out by Center. So we've signed a contract to store the gas if this ever gets completed. So that's the conflict that I have, which one of my colleagues said wasn't a conflict and encouraged me not to recuse myself because they're two separate projects. But I didn't want any idea that there was some sort of influence that the commission had. So I thought it was best to recuse myself. But so that means I can talk about that project, just, you know, that case. I don't have a lot of interest to talk about that project per se, but generally on CO2, eminent domain in general, we are not the decision makers of eminent domain. The commission is not. There's a couple processes involved in eminent domain. The first is a company has to declare themselves a common pipeline carrier. They do that by just telling us, the commission, that they intend to be a common pipeline carrier. That is a definition that is in federal law, and a common pipeline carrier just generally is an open access pipeline that files tariffs, their rates, with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that's FERC. FERC approves those rates, and that means that anybody that wants to access that pipeline to transport their product can do that. That makes them a common pipeline carrier. So they've declared, in the case of Carbon Summit, they have declared them that they intend to be a common pipeline carrier. So we go through the permitting process. I just outlined what's involved in that, what we look at, and how that process works. Once that process is complete and a facility receives a permit from us, if there are landowners along the line, whether, no matter what it is, transmission line, pipeline, those would be the biggest ones. Wind farms cannot use eminent domain. But if there is some holdouts that haven't signed the easements, the company then goes through the eminent domain process, which is handled by the courts. The court looks at the public interest standard and determines if there is a public interest in this facility and if eminent domain is warranted. And then if they determine yes, then they set the price. They look at, you know, it has to be a fair market value price. So that's just kind of the big picture of how that eminent domain process works. The commission does not declare eminent domain. Now, some have been saying that, well, the permit is the first step to the eminent domain process. And, you know, from the standpoint that the court stuff generally follows that, then yes, that's true. But we don't talk about eminent domain in our process. We don't review it. We aren't a decision maker for it. So CO2 lines can be considered for eminent domain. The judge will determine whether there's that public interest met. And I will just say, just in general, to step back on eminent domain, a couple of things. It's not used very much. In the projects that we've dealt with, I can say I have never received a complaint from a landlord that was eminent domained in my 10 years on the commission. So like Dakota Access, I think they got 100% voluntary easements. Well, it was a pretty small amount then. I would say maybe 5%. Okay, well, I agreed. Fair enough, and I'm glad to hear you say that. I would love it. I'm going to go back and check how much, because I had said I thought it was a small amount, and my staff said last week, no, I don't think there was any that was eminent domain. So thank you for clarifying that. And I know some like basin transmission lines, we had, a few landowners that had refused, and they had to use eminent domain on a few. So it's a big deal to use eminent domain. And the whole theory in allowing it goes back, many decades when public utilities were first established to provide phone, electric service to people. And in order to provide that service, there was a public interest established that they could have, there's your territory, you're providing electric service, you're providing natural gas service, you're providing telephone service. In order to provide that for all the public, you have to have the infrastructure to do it. The infrastructure is key to providing that service. And so you have to be able to get that infrastructure out there. Ideally voluntarily, but if you can't, eminent domain could be granted. The whole theory of it. There's an argument to be made, and the question in the legislature that needs to be resolved is CO2 public interest or not. It is more part of the generation and energy use process today than ever before, because without carbon capture and storage, fossil fuels have a very limited life. Because we don't see it here in North Dakota, but I spend an awful lot of time on the national level, and